Here we are again, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. We're going to read Chapter 3. This is Mrs. Becky Smith talking, and we're just going to get through this, but I want you guys to continue to remember to see these pictures in your mind and maybe take a little scrap piece of paper and sketch out what you see in your mind from the details this book gives. And after this video, I hope to draw a little picture myself to show you what I saw in my mind as I read Chapter 3. This one's called Across the Moor. She slept a long time, and when she awakened, Mrs. Medlock had bought a lunch basket at one of the stations, and they had some chicken and cold beef and bread and butter and some hot tea. The rain seemed to be streaming down more heavily than ever, and everybody in the station wore wet and glistening waterproofs. The guard lighted the lamps in the carriage, and Mrs. Medlock cheered up very much over her tea and chicken and beef. She ate a great deal and afterward fell asleep herself, and Mary sat and stared at her and watched her fine bonnet slip on one side until she herself fell asleep once more in the corner of the carriage, lulled by the splashing of the rain against the windows. It was quite dark when she awakened again. The train had stopped at a station, and Mrs. Medlock was shaking her. "You have had a sleep," she said. "It's time to open your eyes. We're at the Thwaite station, and we've got a long drive before us." The station was a small one, and nobody but themselves seemed to be getting out of the train. The station master spoke to Mrs. Medlock in a rough, good-natured way, pronouncing his words in a strange, broad fashion which Mary found out afterward was Yorkshire. "I see thah's got back," he said, "and thah's brought the young un with thee." "Aye, that's her," answered Miss Medlock, speaking with a Yorkshire accent herself and jerking her head over her shoulder toward Mary. "How's thy missus?" "Well, and now the carriage is waiting outside for thee." A brougham stood on the road before the little outside platform. A brougham is a light, horse-drawn carriage closed on all sides. The driver sits outside in the front. That's what it's right here, brougham. Brougham? I don't know how to say it. But anyway, it was sitting outside the platform. Mary saw that it was a smart carriage, and that it was a smart footman who helped her in. Smart back then meant really nice, very, very fine-looking, nice. The footman, his long waterproof coat and the waterproof covering of his hat were shining and dripping with rain, as everything was, and the burly station master included. When he shut the door, mounted the box with the coachman, and they drove off, the little girl found herself seated in a comfortable, cushiony corner, but she was not inclined to go to sleep again. She sat and looked out of the window, curious to see something of the road over which she was being driven to this strange place Miss Medlock had spoken of. She was not at all timid. She was not exactly frightened, but she felt that there was no knowing what might happen in a house with 100 rooms nearly all shut up, a house standing on the edge of a moor. "What is a moor?" she said suddenly to Mrs. Medlock. "Look out of the window in about 10 minutes and you'll see," the woman answered. "We've got to drive 5 miles across Missel Moor before we get to the manor. You won't see much because it's dark night, but you can see something." Mary asked no more questions, but waited in the darkness of her corner, keeping her eyes on the window. The carriage lamps cast rays of light a little distance ahead of them, and she caught glimpses of the things they passed. And after they had left the station, they had driven through a tiny village, and she had seen whitewashed cottages and the lights of a public house. And then they had passed a church and a vicarage and a little shop window, and so on, a village with toys and sweets and odd things set out for sale. I don't know why I said village. And so in a cottage with toys and sweets and odd things set out for sale. And then they went on the high road, and she saw hedges and trees. And after that, there seemed nothing different for a long time, or at least it seemed a long time to her. At last the horses began to go more slowly, as if they were climbing uphill, and presently there seemed to be no more hedges and no more trees. She could see nothing, in fact, but a dense darkness on either side. She leaned forward and pressed her face against the window just as the carriage gave a big jolt. "Hey, we're on the moor now for sure enough," said Mrs. Medlock, and the carriage lamps shed a yellow light on a rough-looking road, which seemed to be cut through bushes and low-growing things, which ended in a great expanse of dark, apparently spread out before and around them. A wind was rising and making a singular, wild, low, rushing sound. It's not the sea, is it?" said Mary, looking round at her companion. "No, not it," answered Miss Medlock. "Nor it isn't fields nor mountains. It's just miles and miles and miles of wild land that nothing grows on but heather and gorse and broom, and nothing lives on but wild ponies and sheep. I feel as if it might be the sea, if there were water on it," said Mary. "It sounds like the sea just now." "That's the wind blowing through the bushes," said Medlock. "It's a wild, dreary enough place to my mind, though there's plenty that likes it, particularly when the heather's in bloom." On and on they drove through the darkness, and though the rain stopped, the wind rushed by and whistled and made strange sounds. The road went up and down, and several times the carriage passed over a little bridge beneath which water rushed very fast with a great deal of noise. Mary felt as if the drive would never come to an end, and that the whole bleak moor was a wide expanse of